que inmediatamente
to
was completed the unite the
que
The 7,011th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Great Lakes region, supporting the Great Lakes framework. Without objection, the agenda is adopted, and it's my pleasure to warmly welcome the distinguished Secretary General, the ministers, and the other distinguished representatives in the Security Council chamber. I think everybody's participation here is an affirmation of the importance of the subject matter that is under discussion. Under Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Belgium, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the Republic of the Congo, Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania, and Uganda to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. Under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Dr. Jim Yong Kim, the President of the World Bank, to participate in the meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome Dr. Kim, who is joining today's meeting via teleconference from Washington. And under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mrs. Mary Robinson, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region. It is so decided. Under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, all of these rules, which I'm obviously enormously familiar with, I invite His Excellency, Mr. Ramtan Lamamra, Commissioner for Peace and Security of the African Union, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. And under Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Mr. Pierre Vimont, Executive Secretary General of the European External Action Service, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I want to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2013/387, the report of the Secretary General on the implementation of the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region. I also wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2013/394, a letter dated 3 July 2013 from the Chargé d'Affaires ad interim of the United States Mission to the United Nations, addressed to the Secretary General. And before you is a statement by the President on behalf of the Council on the subject of today's meeting. I want to thank all the Council members for their very valuable contributions to this statement. And in accordance with the understanding reached among the members of the Council, I take it that the members of the Security Council agree to the statement, which will be issued as a document of the Security Council under the symbol S/PRST/2013/11. It is so decided. Now it is my privilege, and I mean that, an enormous privilege, to make a statement in my capacity as the Secretary of State of the United States of America. I begin by saying how genuinely honored I am to be able to join you at the United Nations, presiding over the Security Council in our role for this period as the Secretary of State. And it's also a privilege to chair the Security Council on a subject, a challenge that is central to the mission of this vital organization, that is realizing the promise of peace. For far, far too long, far too many lives in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the broader Great Lakes region have been ravaged by targeted, grotesque violence. They have been subjected to human rights abuses, and the region has been disrupted by dangerous instability. The crisis that we witness today underscores what we already know. It is a stark reminder of what fills the vacuum in the absence of good governance, basic dignity, and in the absence of firm leadership that holds accountable those who violate basic standards of decency. It reminds, or it ought to remind, all of us of an obligation that we all share, not only to end the killing, the raping, the forcing of children into combat, the devastation and the fear, but the obligation to establish a lasting peace and a climate of development. And in doing so, we can create the space for productivity and partnerships, for greater opportunity for the citizens of the DRC, and for the birth of a new generation of stability and of hope. We can actually prove to the world that all of us working together, and I might add, prove it at a time where many people are doubting the capacity of institutions to function, and where they doubt the capacity of political leadership to solve problems. Well, we have the ability to prove to the world that together we actually can make a difference. The seeds of this promise have already been planted, but our job doesn't end with the creation of the framework. It continues in the cultivation of the seeds, in making sure that we implement the framework, that we create a vigilant, accountable, and cooperative effort in order to see those seeds grow into a full-blown peace that is sustainable. I want to recognize our partners in that effort. First, I thank the Secretary General for his personal engagement. I thank World Bank President Kim for the same kind of engagement and for their partnership. President Obama and I are very grateful to both leaders and the institutions that they lead for the very novel UN World Bank partnership that has been created, which provides incentives for political progress through projects that create stability and improve infrastructure. Clearly, boosting regional commerce in the short term is one path to realizing stability and security in the long term. And I think that we're all very hopeful that this approach can succeed in the Great Lakes region and perhaps even serve as a model for other areas like Mali and through the Maghreb and beyond. Regrettably, we have no dearth of locations where we are challenged and could use this kind of model today. I'd just say parenthetically that in the Middle East, in the West Bank and Palestine, we are beginning to look at a similar kind of model and hope that we could combine our efforts over the long term to find new ways to build sustainable peace. I want to particularly also thank UN Special Envoy Mary Robinson, a longtime friend, somebody I've admired for a long time, and I reiterate the United States' support for her work with regional leaders in the implementation of the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework. We particularly welcome the priority that she places on including regional women's groups, local communities, and civil society in the framework peace process as we seek to break the cycle of violence and break down the barriers between humanitarian aid and the people who are desperate for it. The day before President Obama nominated me to be Secretary of State, I met with Denis Mukwege, who just a few weeks earlier had fled the DRC after an attempt on his life. Denis has demonstrated the courage to stand up and protect women and children from the weapons of war, which too often people only talk about in a whisper. The victims of these horrific crimes and humanitarians like Dr. Mukwege, who protect and treat those people, and all of the people in that region desperately need a voice. And I know, and I obviously, because he chose her, the Secretary General knows that Mary Robinson is committed to being that voice as the region and the international community address the full range of issues involved in translating the broad principles of the framework into concrete benchmarks for implementation. So thank you, Mary Robinson, for what you're doing. We're grateful for your continued public service. It's also a great pleasure for me today to introduce all of you and to introduce U.S. Special Envoy Russ Feingold, former Senator Russ Feingold. The suffering in the Great Lakes, which we are going to debate and talk about here today, is a high-level priority for President Obama and for me, and it is one that we believe must be met by high-level leadership. I had the pleasure of working in the United States Senate for 18 years with Senator Feingold, and there is no one, in my judgment, in the Senate who was more trusted for his expertise in African issues. He brings enormous intellect, passion, and courage to this challenge. And I'm very pleased that he has consented to take this on. I also bring you the greetings of former Ambassador of the United Nations, Susan Rice, who asked me to give you a warm good morning and hello. And we chatted briefly before coming here so I could get the latest tips on exactly what to do and what not to do today. The United States joins every single one of you in welcoming the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework. It is a very important first step. But we also recognize that the progress the region has made since February is extremely fragile. And the key question before all of us today is whether the commitments prescribed in the framework can be kept, will be kept. Will they come to life, or are they only going to be destined to live on paper? Let me underscore. The United States stands ready to support the signatories, and we will work with you with focus and energy and persistence in order to implement the framework. But as President Obama said, there has to be follow-through. I want to make it clear in that context. The United States is deeply concerned about recent reports of resumed external support to M23, as well as of collaboration with the FDLR. So I want to be emphatic here today. All parties must immediately end their support for armed rebel groups. All governments must hold human rights violators and abusers accountable. We must end the era of impunity, and that, unfortunately, has been rampant. To this end, the United States welcomes the deployment of the Intervention Brigade, and we support its mandate to neutralize all armed groups and protect civilians so that peace can take hold. We believe that it is now time for everyone in the region to exercise restraint and to return to the constructive path that you have set out for yourselves, to move forward together so that we can address the root causes of this conflict and end it once and for all. I believe this is doable. I believe it is the absence of governance and the absence of an international presence that has created the vacuum that has permitted people to act with the impunity they have acted. I know that moving ahead isn't easy. I know it takes courage. But we have to all accept that this is our responsibility. So as the chair of this debate, and as a representative of a nation that, like all of yours, has a stake in the stability of the Great Lakes, I want to urge all of us around this table to take advantage of the unique opportunity that the framework provides. The United States challenges, respectfully, all of those who have committed themselves to the framework to respect, in turn, the national sovereignty and the territorial integrity of the DRC. We can't emphasize enough how critical it is that everyone fosters cooperation across borders. We challenge everyone to finalize the benchmarks that are outlined in the framework and to adopt them during the UN General Assembly in September. We strongly urge everyone to formally include the voices that Special Envoy Robinson has engaged, voices that have too often been excluded, particularly those of women. And we challenge the DRC to continue implementing reforms to its security sector and to reestablish state authority, particularly in the East. And finally, we pledge to join the Security Council, the DRC, regional governments, and the international community to do everything in our power to achieve a comprehensive peace accord. Every one of us here understands the complex history of suffering in the Great Lakes region. But we all have a responsibility, a universally endowed responsibility, to ensure that a history of violence is not going to be followed by a future of vengeance. The only way to properly honor the millions of lives that have been lost is through peace. And the only way to achieve that peace is for the United Nations and all of the countries in the region and all of the countries with the capacity to step up and help to show the way forward. So thank you for the privilege of sharing a few thoughts with you. I will now resume my function as President of the Council, and I give the floor to Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. Ban Ki-moon.
Your Excellency, John Kerry, Secretary of State and President of the Security Council, distinguished members of the Security Council, honorable ministers who are attending this session, Dr. Jim Yong Kim, President of World Bank, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the United States for convening this debate and the Secretary of State, John Kerry, for presiding. His presence is a testament to the importance the United States places on this important issue. Allow me also to welcome the appointment of Senator Russ Feingold as the new United States Special Representative for the African Great Lakes region and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I wish him success in the critical month ahead and hope that he will continue to very closely coordinate with my Special Envoy, Mary Robinson. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now 5 months since the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region was signed, and 4 months since this Council adopted Resolution 2098. Hopes were high that we could see an end to the large-scale cyclical violence that has ravaged Eastern DRC over the past 2 decades and derailed the previous peace initiatives. Peace would mean a due chance for development and lasting security for some of the world's most sorely tested people. I am therefore deeply concerned about the current hostilities between M23 movement and the Congolese armed forces. All parties need to return as soon as possible to the Kampala talks. I have called for maximum restraint and urge all framework signatories to jointly and individually respect their commitment. The lack of mutual trust in the region has thwarted past attempts to find political solutions to the entrenched problems that continue to drive the conflict. It is vital that the government of the DRC and its eastern neighbors pursue constructive dialogue. At the national level, structural reforms within the DRC will help address the root causes of the violence. The government has taken initial steps towards army reform, decentralization, and national dialogue. It is essential to translate these commitments into tangible results. At the regional level, leaders must look beyond the issues that divide them and work together to define a common agenda for lasting peace and prosperity based on trade, economic cooperation, and mutual respect for each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Mr. President, Excellencies, The Peace, Security, Cooperation Framework provides a clear roadmap. My Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, Mrs. Mary Robinson, will continue to support the parties to uphold the commitments that they have adhered to under the framework. My Special Representative for the DRC and Head of MONUSCO, Mr. Martin Kobler, will support the political process in the DRC and support it in implementing its national commitments. The prospects for durable peace in Eastern DRC remain better than they have for many years. But spoilers are active, including armed groups and militias that have shown little inclination to engage in a genuine peace process. To address this threat, we are reinforcing MONUSCO. The Force Intervention Brigade is an important tool, but is only one part of a comprehensive approach that embraces security and development. However, while the United Nations and the international community can do much, we depend on the framework signatories to provide the essential foundation. All parties must avoid renewed hostilities and achieve progress on the political track. Conflict and lawlessness in Eastern DRC have crippled development and entrenched extreme poverty and suffering. There are appalling levels of brutal sexual violence. The region needs security. But for lasting peace, we must also provide opportunity. The UN system is committed to promoting economic development in DRC and the Great Lakes region. Last May, during our joint visit of myself and the World Bank President, Dr. Jim Yong Kim, the World Bank has committed an additional $1 billion for better health and education services, cross-border trade, and hydroelectricity projects, giving due impetus to regional economic integration. I thank the leadership and continuing engagement and commitment of World Bank President Dr. Jim Yong Kim, and I'm going to work very closely with him in other areas to set the model of partnership between the United Nations and World Bank. This is central to building the trust and interdependence that are critical to the success of the peace, security, and cooperation framework. Excellencies, the current fighting in Eastern DRC casts a grave shadow, but we should not allow it to deter us from our objective. It should make us even more determined to lift the people from the oppression of insecurity, human rights abuses, and poverty. I count on the framework signatories to work constructively with each other and with my special envoy to develop benchmarks for their commitments. These will inform the strategic roadmap for implementation to be presented for endorsement in the margins of the General Assembly General Debate in September. And I call on the international community to use all the tools at its disposal, from international criminal prosecution and sanctions regimes to development assistance. My Special Envoy Mary Robinson has described the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework as a framework of hope. I urge all signatories and the international community to keep the hope alive. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, and thank you again for your leadership. I now give the floor and the video screen to Dr. Jim Yong Kim, President of the World Bank.
Thank you very much. Honorable ministers, the African Union Commissioner, members of the Security Council, and UN member states. Especially would like to thank UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. Mr. Secretary General, you are the leader of the entire multilateral system, and your strong visionary leadership on this issue is what's giving drive and impetus to our work together. We look forward to continuing to follow your lead and playing our role. Secretary Kerry, as a longtime resident of Massachusetts, I want to thank you for your leadership over decades. I also want to thank you for your extremely generous mentorship and support of me personally. Quite literally, I would not be in this job without your support. And I also especially want to thank the Secretary General for appointing Mary Robinson as the UN Special Envoy. And for the people in the room who do not know, I want to make a special point to make it clear that U.S. Special Envoy Russ Feingold is a person who has been deeply committed to Africa. I remember warmly my years of working with Senator Feingold as he championed increased funding and support for AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria programs. Senator Feingold is a true champion and friend of Africa. It's an honor and pleasure to take part in this briefing, and I thank you for the invitation, as I recognize that our work at the World Bank Group has to be aligned with political realities at the global, regional, national, and local levels. I'll focus my remarks on the development aspects of peace and security in the Great Lakes region and outline what the World Bank Group is doing to support the framework. As the Secretary General has noted, we visited the Great Lakes region together earlier this year. It was the first time in history that the President of the World Bank and the Secretary General of the United States the United Nations, have traveled together on mission. The choice of our destination and the timing of our trip was not an accident. The Secretary General's groundbreaking work and the commitment of all the countries in the region to the framework agreement provides all of us with an opening to end violence, secure peace, and lay the foundation of a more robust economic development. These foundations will make a difference in lifting people out of poverty, creating jobs, and providing access to health and education. The Secretary General and I delivered one message over and over during our trip, and I'll repeat it now. We cannot have development without peace, and we cannot have peace without development. Conflict not only stops development, but it can reverse years of development gains. The eastern provinces of the DRC are a good example of a tragedy with an immense human cost that has gone on for far too long. Over 3.5 million people are estimated to have died since 1998. Another 4.7 million people lost their homes, and over 2 million children cannot benefit from education due to the destruction of schools. The poverty rate is about 70%, and overall access to economic services, including energy, is very limited. But let me also argue that the long-term sustainable peace and stability will not be achieved without addressing the underlying key economic drivers of conflict and instability. These drivers of conflict spill across the borders and therefore call for a regional approach to address issues such as insecure and insufficient access to land, population displacement, and illicit exploitation and mining of high-value minerals and timber. Moreover, these problems are compounded by rapid population growth and lack of economic opportunity. On our trip together, the Secretary General and I demonstrated the commitment of the UN and the World Bank Group to collaborate in bringing tangible benefits to the people of the Great Lakes region and to pursue peace, stability, and development in a comprehensive manner within our national and regional programs. We were heartened by the commitment of the political leaders to implementing the framework. We were also heartened by the interest in regional initiatives to promote development. This leadership is essential for the success of the framework and for sustainable peace in the region. On our trip, we committed to increase the cooperation between our institutions and with other partners such as the European Union, the African Development Bank, and the regional economic communities to maximize the impact of our efforts. We will strongly support the Office of the Secretary General Special Envoy to the Great Lakes and increase our collaboration with the UN on the ground. And we will use our convening power to encourage greater investment, including from the private sector in the region. I also announced that the World Bank Group will provide an additional $1 billion over the next 24 months for cross-border development issues. Of these, about $500 million will be for hydroelectric power projects to increase energy access in several Great Lakes countries, about $350 million for transport linkages and border management, and about $100 million for agriculture and rural livelihoods targeted at refugees and internally displaced persons. This is extremely important given that the region has 1 million refugees and more than 2 million internally displaced persons in a situation of protracted displacement. I'd like to add that all of our assistance will be informed by a gender perspective, and we will provide additional resources for programs to address sexual and gender-based violence, as well as assistance for basic health services for vulnerable women and children through networks of health centers. Economic empowerment of women, as well as promotion and protection of their rights and increased voice all have important roles in reducing violence. We will also expand our assistance for networks of regional public health laboratories to allow countries to develop and share specific expertise. This has been very successful to date. I'm pleased to inform you that in 2 weeks, our board of directors will consider the first project under this initiative, the Rusumo Falls Hydroelectric Dam. I'm sure that progress in the areas I just mentioned will create significant economic opportunities and help to generate jobs. And I'm convinced that regional approaches I've outlined will help to promote greater cooperation and integration within the region and bring tangible benefits to all Great Lakes countries. We're under no illusion that this support will be enough. Our assistance fits into a larger mosaic of development for the region and will focus on leveraging private sector investment. We also understand that while the large energy projects will be critical for the long-term development of the region, we also need to move as rapidly and as efficiently as possible with smaller projects so that the people of the region feel the tangible benefits of peace. Indeed, in coming months, delivering on our promises related to agriculture, jobs, cross-border trading, education, and healthcare will help determine whether these efforts will succeed. We must deliver on our promises, and we must move with as much urgency as we can. All this work will stem not from the priorities made in the World Bank Group headquarters in Washington or the UN headquarters in New York. It will be guided by the priorities set by African stakeholders and their emphasis on both quick wins and medium to longer term results. I'm pleased that last week we were able to co-host a meeting on regional approaches to development in the Great Lakes countries with the African Union Commission and the United Nations to further this agenda. At the meeting, participants agreed on the importance of these approaches. They also agreed to collaborate immediately on several steps, including a mapping of country priorities and partner assistance, and establish an accountability and follow-up mechanism. The report of the meeting will be presented to the 11+4 summit in September. Finally, when the Secretary General and I traveled to the Heal Hospital in Goma to visit women who suffered from violence and the healthcare workers who care for them, we heard many painful stories. These women's stories must be heard and must be remembered. Their words should prepare us for the difficulties that are sure to come and harden our commitment to the framework agreement, because we must not let this continue. What happened to these women, what's happened to millions of people caught in the web of conflict in the eastern regions of the DRC, is a stain on all our consciences. Outside the hospital, we saw scores of women and even girls holding placards with messages such as, "We are tired of conflict, we've had enough, and peace, 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 please." I want to assure you, as I assured those women and girls we met, that the World Bank Group is in this for the long run. With the Secretary General's bold leadership, we're determined to stay the course for these women and all others who've been robbed of economic opportunity by years of conflict. It's time for all of us to move together, to move quickly, and to deliver on our promises. Thank you very much.
Jim, thank you very much for an important briefing and an eloquent statement, and thank you for the creative leadership together with the Secretary General and your willingness to create this new partnership, and I hope it can be really a solid model for the future. It's now my privilege to give the floor to Mrs. Mary Robinson, the Special Envoy for the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State, Mr. Secretary General, President Jim Yong Kim, Honourable Ministers, Excellencies. I'm honoured to speak to you on this important occasion. I too thank the United States for convening this ministerial level meeting and Secretary of State John Kerry for presiding and also for providing a strong statement as chair. Let me reiterate my congratulations to Senator Russ Feingold for his appointment as the United States Special Representative for the African Great Lakes region and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I look forward to working very closely with him. I also welcome the appointment of SRSG Martin Kobler, with whom I have established a very good working relationship. As we've heard, this high-level meeting on the DRC and the Great Lakes takes place at a difficult time for the people in the region. The latest round of fighting in eastern DRC has had devastating consequences yet again on the civilian population, both for those living in and around Goma, but also for the host communities and governments of the neighbouring countries. Many cases of death, injuries, sexual violence against women, and massive displacements of population are still being reported. These cannot be allowed to go on. the fighting must stop immediately, and all parties should exert maximum restraint to avoid a further escalation of the conflict. As you know, I have now served as Special Envoy for 4 months, and not a day goes by without a report of killings, rape, sexual assault and displacement of people in eastern DRC. The reports are in the dry prose of the code cables or the slightly more descriptive style of journalists filing their copy. What strikes me is the lack of outrage and horror at this daily toll. It has become the accepted normal, but it is not normal and not acceptable. We committed to zero tolerance of gender-based violence. Zero tolerance needs to be implemented as a fundamental value of the framework. Like President Kim, I remember the rows of people in Goma who lined the road, holding pieces of paper, mainly in French, which said no impunity, peace now, the fighting must stop. This, in essence, is the promise of the PSC framework, a promise of peace, security, cooperation and development. Sadly, there are credible reports of some activities in support of armed groups by different signatory parties to the framework, which are contrary to the spirit and intent of the framework. As the Secretary-General said, the Force Intervention Brigade, once it becomes operative, will be an important tool with a robust mandate, but it is only one part of a comprehensive approach that embraces security and development. The stark reality is that those who suffer the most from this endless conflict and its atrocities are, and always have been, the civilian population first, particularly women, children, and even babies. Excellencies, as the Secretary-General said in his remarks, hopes were high when the 11 countries and 4 important regional and international institutions signed the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the region on the 24th of February, and when you, distinguished members of the Security Council, adopted Resolution 2098 in March. The framework clearly gives the ownership and the responsibility to the leaders who signed it, and I am personally very encouraged to see their commitment to it is strong and resolute. If fully implemented, both the PSC framework and Resolution 2098 would help stabilise the situation on the ground and, more importantly, would pave the way to address the fundamental causes of the cycle of conflicts in eastern DRC and the Great Lakes. That's why I strongly believe that the signatories and guarantors of the PSC framework and the international community as a whole need to work intensively together to accompany the leaders and the people of the Great Lakes to transform what I call the framework of hope into a tangible reality. Despite the security and humanitarian challenges that the DRC and the Great Lakes region are facing at the moment, I'm encouraged by initial progress in several areas and by the strong will demonstrated by the signatory countries to contribute to the implementation of the PSC framework. Allow me to share with you some of the positive political steps that the signatories of the PSC framework and key international institutions have taken since February. At the national level, President Kabila established in May the National Oversight Mechanism, which will oversee the implementation of the commitments of the DRC under the PSC framework. I very much hope, and I made this clear to President Kabila, that the National Oversight Mechanism will include a large cross-section of the civil society in carrying out its mandate. At the same time, national reforms that the DRC has agreed to implement under the PSC framework need to begin in earnest and be supported by the international community. I'd like to welcome the recent initiative of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the International Conference of the Great Lakes to launch a mineral certification programme in an effort to stop the illegal exploitation of minerals and prevent armed groups in eastern DRC from benefiting from it. This is an important first step which deserves the full support of the international community. At the regional level, the first meeting of the Regional Oversight Mechanism, the 11+4 mechanism, took place in Addis Ababa on the 26th of May and established a technical support committee mandated to develop the benchmarks and indicators of progress for the implementation of the PSC framework, amongst other tasks. The committee is made up of senior representatives from the signatory countries of the PSC, who met twice so far, on the 24th of June and earlier this week on the 22nd and 23rd of July, under the co-chairmanship of my Special Advisor Modibo Touré and the African Union Special Representative for the Great Lakes, Ambassador Boubacar Diarra. Participants also included senior officials from ICGLR, SADC, MONUSCO and the UN Department of Political Affairs. I'm glad to report that the committee has made solid progress in developing benchmarks and indicators of progress. These may still be improved, but they are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound, with a clear indication of responsibilities. In accordance with its immediate mandate, the committee focused on regional benchmarks, but also provided critical inputs for international benchmarks and national benchmarks. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the committee and the leaders of the region who responded positively to my request to each to appoint one of their closest advisors to represent them in this work. I will present the benchmarks developed by the committee to the leaders of the region during the next ICGLR summit, scheduled for 31st of July in Nairobi, ahead of the next meeting of the 11+4 regional oversight mechanism, which, as the Secretary-General has said, should formally adopt them in September here in New York. In the meantime, I will, of course, continue consultations with all those involved in the implementation process of the PSC framework to ensure that the proposed benchmarks meet their concerns. 2 significant regional meetings took place recently, with positive outcomes that I'd like to share with you. The first was the regional consultation on women, peace, security and development in the Great Lakes, which I organised in collaboration with Femme Africa Solidarité, FAS, and the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region, ICGLR, from the 9th to the 11th of July in Bujumbura, Burundi. More than 100 women leaders from signatory countries of the PSC framework attended the conference, including the gender ministers of the DRC, Rwanda, Uganda and Burundi. You will recall that I made it clear from the beginning that as Special Envoy, I intended to implement a top-down and bottom-up comprehensive approach, whereby I'll be working on the one hand with political leaders and on the other hand with the people of the region to encourage peace, security and development. It was important to listen to the Great Lakes women's perspectives on the peace process, as women represent the majority of the population in the region and are, together with children, the first victims of the ongoing conflict. I gave them the opportunity to suggest possible benchmarks and indicators, which were later submitted to the Technical Support Committee for consideration. Perhaps I should explain that, not too surprisingly, the Technical Support Committee is entirely male in its composition. I will continue to encourage women-led initiatives in the region through the establishment of a communications platform through which experts and donors could provide technical advice and funds to women's projects in support of the framework of hope. As President Kim mentioned, the second meeting took place on the 18th and 19th of July in Addis Ababa. The African Union, the World Bank and my office organised a ministerial meeting on regional approaches to development in countries of the Great Lakes in support of the PSC framework. The meeting was attended by Ministers of Finance and Economic Planning and Ministers of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of countries of the Great Lakes region, regional economic communities, partner countries, international organisations and civil society organisations. This proved to be a very good forum for discussion, building on the historic joint visit of Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon and World Bank President Jim Kim to the Great Lakes region in May. Participants noted that deepened regional economic cooperation and integration and enhanced regional infrastructure and trade could foster economic inclusion and create opportunities, particularly for disadvantaged groups, women and youth, as well as strengthen political agreements by delivering tangible results. They indicated a number of priority regional interventions in energy and transport infrastructure, agriculture, cross-border trade, economic development and social sectors. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Addis Ababa participants and also President Jim Kim for his commitment of the $1 billion in support of the implementation of the PSC framework, which effectively turns the PSC framework into a framework for peace, security, cooperation and development. Excellencies, all these steps, though they may appear minor for the millions of people on the ground who are eagerly awaiting to see peace established and their lives changing, are concrete affirmation of the determination of the international community to try new avenues for sustainable peace and stability and development in the Great Lakes region. I will soon come back to you with further elements for the implementation of the PSC framework, which will be built on 3 critical pillars: political and security, humanitarian and development. Elements of this strategy will include sustained confidence-building measures among leaders in the region, joint efforts with the SRSG from MONUSCO and international partners to support the national dialogue process in the DRC, cross-border development projects with a strong focus on civil society, youth and women's groups, and modalities to support difficult mediation building on the Kampala dialogue within the limits of my mandate, including strict compliance with international human rights and humanitarian law. I'm fully aware of the challenges that the governments of the region and the Security Council face to advance peace in the Great Lakes region. My role, I hope, will be a modest but catalytic contribution to help restore peace and build hope for the future in a complex environment. But such a strategy and the Council's engagement with the Great Lakes region will bear fruit only if all actors involved at the local, national, regional and international levels push in the same direction. And if, let me reiterate this, there is an immediate cessation of hostilities in eastern DRC. I believe that there is some political momentum at the moment. We need to create and encourage space for dialogue and support for tough decisions. We need to tell each other the truth, quietly when necessary but firmly, and stick to our commitments to the PSC framework if we're to make a real difference this time. I've been having frank conversations with the leaders of the region, and I intend to continue to do so in the coming months, including next week when I meet them in Nairobi. I encourage the members of the Security Council to keep the Great Lakes region high on your agenda and maintain the current momentum, including perhaps through a visit to the Great Lakes region in the coming months. Let me conclude by warmly thanking the Security Council members, the Secretary-General and my UN colleagues, as well as regional and international partners who have continuously expressed and provided support to my work. I know I can count on you to try to move the PSC framework agenda forward, and I'm really grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Special Envoy. Thank you for your briefing and thank you for your work. And I know Special Envoy Senator Feingold is really looking forward to working with you. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Ramtan Lamamra.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. Mr. President of the Council, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, members of the Council. Allow me to begin by conveying to the President of the Security Council for the month of July 2013, the Secretary of State, Mr. John Kerry, as well as to the members of the Security Council, the thanks of the African Union Commission for the invitation to take part in this important meeting on the situation in the DRC and the Great Lakes region. Madam Dlamini Zuma, the President of the AU Commission, regrets being unable to take part in this important meeting, which is part of efforts to implement the frame agreement for peace, security, and cooperation in the DRC and the region. This is an agreement signed in Addis Ababa on 24 February. Indeed, the first of the commitments undertaken by the international community regards the expected role of the Security Council regarding the importance of supporting the long-term stability of the DRC and the region of the Great Lakes. Moreover, the follow-up mechanism instructs the DRC, as well as neighboring countries and regional partners and the international community, to work in sync so as to promote the commitments undertaken. The high-quality report of the Secretary-General before the Security Council aptly describes the situation in the region as well as related challenges. For the AU, this high-level meeting is a strong demonstration of the importance accorded by the United States government and other members of the Security Council to peace and security on the African continent, as well as to a swift and lasting settlement of the crisis in eastern DRC specifically. This commitment has been made clear through the unanimous support of members of the Security Council to the efforts of the Secretary-General of the United Nations in implementing the framework agreement. Indeed, I would note that the appointment of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General on the region of the Great Lakes, planned for by the Framework Agreement, has taken place. And along these lines, I'm pleased with the high quality of working relations between Madam Mary Robinson and Ambassador Boubacar Gasso Diarra, the Special Representative of the AU for the Great Lakes region. Also, I would like to express my satisfaction at the adoption of the important Resolution 2098, which allowed MONUSCO to adapt to a new situation and created the Intervention Brigade upon the request of countries of the region and the African Union. The AU is grateful to South Africa, Malawi, and Tanzania for their contribution to the establishment of the brigade, which is currently being deployed and operationalized. However, I must note that instead of the agreement so expected from negotiations headed by President Museveni from Uganda in Kampala with know-how and patience, instead, full-scale military clashes have taken place between the DRC armed forces and elements of the M23, dimming prospects for the current situation in the region and laying bare the path which lies ahead for the dawning of a new era in the region. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, information provided to your Council by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Madam Mary Robinson, the President of the World Bank, as well as expected information which should be forthcoming from the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the DRC, Uganda, and Rwanda, who are here today with us. All of this information serves to apprise the Council of the political, security, and humanitarian situation on the ground, the implementation or state of implementation of the Framework Agreement, as well as Resolution 2098 of the Security Council, and the political process underway. Against this backdrop and the realities on the ground, the challenges of the situation and prospects, the urgent needs and demands for scaled-up and bolstered commitment from the international community in the Great Lakes are clearer than ever. In this context, Madam Robinson and Ambassador Diarra are endeavoring to create conditions conducive to effective and full implementation of the Framework Agreement. I'm aware that the Congolese authorities, as well as those of the states parties to the 11+4 mechanism, have expressed their strong will to make good on commitments and I also know that the backing of the entirety of the international community to the DRC and countries of the region shall not be lacking if UN initiatives, as well as those of international financial institutions and development partners, are any indication. The advisory meeting on development approaches for the countries of the region of the Great Lakes between the AU, the UN, and the World Bank was organized these past days in Addis Ababa and is part of the same consistent approach. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the African Union believes that the dynamism stemming from the Framework Agreement and 2098 of the Security Council can pave the way for new possibilities for peace, security, and development, so necessary in the region, in a propitious regional and international context. The care with which the DRC government has implemented the national follow-up mechanism, as well as national meetings planned for, all of these initiatives bode well. Regionally speaking, mobilization continues with the authorities of Great Lakes countries, as well as the South African development community. All of these efforts bear witness to the shared desire to halt instability and dedicate resources as well as energy to development and integration. The forthcoming summit of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region on 31 July in Nairobi will be dedicated to matters of peace and security, as well as follow up on the implementation of the Framework Agreement, and should be an opportunity to address all expectations and undertake necessary activities for fully drawing upon the potential of the region. The current Security Council meeting, in the wake of the inaugural meeting of the 11+4 mechanism, co-presided in Addis Ababa by the Secretary-General of the United Nations and the President of the AU Commission on 26 May, aptly symbolizes a qualitatively new stage in collective action of the international community for the people and the countries of the region. The African Union is pleased with this initiative and reiterates its commitment to take full part in these welcome efforts for peace, security, democracy, and development across the Great Lakes region. I thank you.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Sam Kutesa, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President, Secretary General, Honorable Ministers, members of the Council. Let me at the outset congratulate you and the United States delegation on your leadership of the Security Council this month. Thank you for organizing and presiding over this important and timely debate on the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Great Lakes region. I also like to thank Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, Special Envoy Mary Robinson, World Bank President Jim Yong Kim, and the AU Commissioner for Peace and Security, Mr. Lamamura, for their statements. Mr. President, this debate is taking place at a time when Eastern DRC is in deep crisis again. The presence of a multiplicity of foreign and local armed groups, including ADF, FDLR, FNL, M23, and Mai Mai militias, has exacerbated insecurity in the DRC and the region. Within the framework of the International Conference on Great Lakes region, the region has been involved in efforts towards a peaceful resolution of the instability in Eastern DRC through both political and military approaches. We are convinced that the political process should be at the forefront of our efforts, with peace enforcement measures complementing it. It was in this context that the region conceived the neutral international force, which this Security Council took on and made the Intervention Brigade. In this regard, Uganda welcomes the statement by the UN Secretary General, which he made on the 18th July 2013, in which he underlined, and I quote, the importance of pursuing a political solution to address the root causes of conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, end quote. We are also encouraged by the approach taken by Special Envoy Mary Robinson and would appreciate her engagement in the political process, including the Kampala peace talks. President Yoweri Museveni, in his capacity as the chairman of ICGLR, has convened 5 extraordinary summits, including 4 in Kampala, aimed at finding a lasting solution to the current conflicts in the DRC. The 6th is due to take place in Nairobi on the 31st July 2013. The extraordinary summits were instrumental in de-escalating the situation in the eastern region last year, and the commencement of the talks in Kampala between the DRC government and the M23, facilitated by my colleague Honorable Crispus Kionga, Uganda's Minister of Defense, who is with me in this chamber. Mr. President, we believe the Kampala talks between the government of DRC and the M23 provide the best opportunity for resolving their differences. The political engagement between the DRC government and the M23 must be given priority in the search for a durable and peaceful solution. The successful conclusion of these talks will no doubt have a positive contribution to the national consultations due to start in DRC. We are glad to inform Council that since December 2012, there has been some progress in the talks, with two key milestones. First, both parties reviewed the peace agreement of 2009 between government of DRC and CNDP and agreed on the status of implementation, which was a significant step in confidence building. Secondly, both parties have presented draft peace agreements in March 2013, which were consolidated into one draft that is currently in its second version and subject to further negotiations. While these developments are commendable, the renewed fighting raises serious concern over the commitment to the talks. We call upon the Security Council and our partners to encourage the parties to expedite and speedily conclude the Kampala talks. We also call upon the international community to provide logistical and financial support to the ICGR mechanisms, such as the Joint Intelligence Fusion Center and the expanded Joint Verification Mechanism. Mr. President, the renewed fighting between the Congolese armed forces and the M23 is a major concern for the region and the international community. Simultaneously, the atrocities committed by the Allied Democratic Forces, which has linkages with Al-Shabaab, have increased since the beginning of July, both in intensity and frequency. During the last 3 weeks, the ADF attacked Kangaboy prison, it captured Kamago town, and ambushed MONUSCO a convoy. These attacks caused an influx of over 66,000 Congolese refugees who fled into Uganda. The humanitarian situation in the region remains a matter of grave concern, as insecurity caused by armed groups has led to large-scale displacements of people. While we deplore and condemn these attacks by ADF and other armed groups, they serve as a grim reminder of the real challenges faced by the DRC and the region. Uganda is particularly concerned about the stability of an imminent attack by the ADF from DRC, and it is our expectation that the new mechanism, combined with RDC's security sector reform, will give it the requisite capacity to deter foreign armed groups from occupying and using its territory to destabilize neighbors. Mr. President, we consider the peace and security and cooperation framework of the DRC and the region as a unique and important milestone towards addressing the challenges in the DRC and the region. In our view, the following three elements of the framework are crucial. First, the PRC framework recognizes a holistic approach as the best way to end instability. Secondly, it outlines commitments and actions at the national, regional, and international levels, and we should focus on their implementation. Thirdly, and most importantly, it emphasizes partnership and collective efforts among the UN, the AU, ICGLR, and SADC. We therefore reiterate and underscore the need for expeditious implementation of the commitments in the PSC framework by the DRC, the region, and the international community. Uganda is committed to playing its part. From our experience, regional-led initiatives with the support of the international community have yielded good and better results on our continent. We underscore the need to bring has called for concerted efforts to address the root causes of conflict in the DRC. We have also called for support for the DRC government to exercise effective authority over all its territory in order to deal with armed groups destabilizing it and the region. Now is the time to redouble our resolve and efforts to effectively address the root causes of the conflicts in Eastern DRC in a comprehensive manner. The forthcoming extraordinary ICGR summit to be held in Nairobi will review the situation in the DRC and the region and actions being undertaken and make specific recommendations to consolidate our efforts. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. We appreciate that, and I hope you will convey our gratitude to the President. And I know your defense minister is here. We're very grateful for your initiatives and for your leadership. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Raymond Tshibanda Ntungamulongo, the Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
President,
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Security Council. First and foremost, I would like, Mr. President, to reiterate to you my warm congratulations to you on your appointment as Secretary of State of the United States. I would also like to express the satisfaction of the Democratic Republic of Congo in seeing you preside over the Security Council at this critical moment in its history, and to thank you for having taken the initiative of organizing this special meeting of the Council on the Great Lakes region. The Great Lakes region, which for several years has seen a cyclical calling into question of its security and peace due to rebellions which have been clearly established as having the same genetic signature, the same designers, the same external support, fallacious justifications, the same actors on the ground, and the same modus operandi, marked by massive violations of human rights, to wit, summary executions and extrajudicial executions, the drafting of child soldiers, sexual violence and rape, pillage of private and public assets, and illegal exploitations of natural resources. By choosing to talk about the DRC at this specific moment, you bear witness to the importance that the government of the United States of America and the Security Council of the United Nations attach to returning to lasting peace in the eastern region of the DRC, and thereby in the region as a whole. I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his personal involvement in the negotiations, conclusion, and implementation of the Framework Agreement for Peace, Security, and Cooperation in the DRC and the region, which was concluded in Addis Ababa on the 24th of February. This Framework Agreement and the Resolution 2098, which bolsters it, constitute true major innovation, both in the grasp of the crisis which has been hitting the region of the Great Lakes since the second half of the 1980s, and in innovation in the traditional doctrine of the United Nations in terms of peacekeeping. For the long-suffering people of the countries in the region, the Framework Agreement and the aforementioned resolution are seen as speaking eloquently to the instability which has lasted too long and for which my country has paid a very heavy price. And it is also true for the most recent joint trip of the Secretary General of the United Nations with the President of the World Bank and Madam Mary Rose Robinson, for which we are also very grateful. I should also recall the sad reality, which is often unknown, to wit, that due to repeated conflicts, my country has lost more than 6 million souls, and thus it is also with gratitude that we see the visits of many other important dignitaries. With the loss of more than 6 million souls, we see a tragedy which is unequaled in the history of mankind and which can leave no one indifferent unless mankind loses its soul. Our meeting of today reflects our will to reaffirm our humanity, to together assess without complacency the level of execution and implementation of commitments undertaken in order to put an end to this drama in the terms of the very significant framework agreement of the 24th of February 2013, in order to specify which challenges can be met in order to restore lasting peace for the region, so that it can devote its energies and intelligence to key questions in order to fight poverty and improving the living conditions of its peoples. Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of Congo is determined to assume its share of responsibility so that peace and harmony can return to the region rapidly. As proof, as soon as the framework agreement was signed, the Congolese government bent its efforts to fulfilling its obligation, and it should be said in passing that many of these tasks have been underway for the last 11 years and seen as important and priority. With this in mind, we have not only accelerated but also systematized reform of the security sector. This involves cleanup of army structures and personnel, of the security and police services, recruiting of young defense Congolese forces from around all provinces in the country, reopening military academies, training with the help of our bilateral partners of special forces and support units, with the priority goal of operationalizing a rapid reaction force. All of these are specific actions undertaken in order to make the defense of our territory more effective and to better ensure the state's authority. With a view to consolidating the state's authority, especially in the east of the Republic, starting with Goma, the National Police, public administration, and the courts all benefit in a priority manner from capacity building. This will make it possible for them to progressively take control of the situation back. Decentralization, as set forth in the Constitution, is closer to becoming a reality with the adoption of necessary legislation to implement decentralization. Reforming management of public finances, which has been underway for several years now, has led to a number of positive results through stability of the macroeconomic framework, and we see this being pursued and usefully completed with the entry into force of cleanup measures in order to improve the business climate and to provide for a national mechanism for certification of mining resources. This will strengthen economic growth, which, notwithstanding, is one of the strongest in the continent and has been on a constant basis for the last 10 years. And better, the government has just begun an in-depth examination of the document for the strategy of growth and to reduce poverty in order to make growth more inclusive and to partially make up for the lag in meeting the Millennium Development Goals and to give the fight against poverty more credibility and greater efficiency. Turning to the political arena now, reconciliation and strengthening national cohesion are more than ever a priority. And thus, the National Follow-up Coordination Mechanism for implementing the Framework Agreement was entrusted to a competent and experienced high-level member of the opposition. The Independent National Electoral Commission has been completely overhauled, and a new team, which is tougher and more inclusive, has just taken the helm of this very significant support for democracy. The new Electoral Commission is working hard to prepare the electoral process for, under the best possible circumstances, local, municipal, provincial, senatorial, and governor province elections. Moreover, at the initiative of the President of the Republic, national consultations will be held as of the month of August. The goal of these consultations is to seek together the means to strengthen national cohesion in order to better meet the challenges before the Congolese people. To be inclusive, this forum will bring together, in addition to national and provincial political institutions, political parties, all trends included, civil society in all of its diversity, as well as significant representation of both women and youth. In preparing this forum and leading it, This was entrusted to a presidium composed of the President of the Senate, a leader well known from the opposition, who was elected to his position as such, and it has also been entrusted to the President of the National Assembly, who represents the presidential majority. Proof of the participatory nature of this exercise is that the political opposition recently prepared and filed a document of demands and proposals and deposited it with the Presidium and the President of the Republic. For each and every of these reforms, as for all other commitments undertaken by the Democratic Republic of Congo due to the framework agreement, benchmarks have been developed and are being exchanges are being held with regard to the benchmarks with Madam Mary Robertson and her team, to whom we would like to reaffirm our support and cooperation. Thus, we will be prepared for the upcoming 11+4 meeting, which will take place in the sidelines of the National General Assembly of the United Nations this September. Mr. President, at this moment, while we are meeting here, the people of Goma and Rutshuru live in fear and uncertainty due to sporadic attacks, which since adoption of Resolution 2098 and in defiance of this resolution, M23 is launching attacks against the defense positions of the FARDC. In order to hide the fact that this negative force is resistant to peace, they are attempting to justify their actions by levying unfounded accusations at the FARDC to discredit it, as well as the Brigade of Intervention in MONUSCO, and have affirmed without any proof that they are collaborating with the FDLR. Those responsible in the United Nations have already responded to these accusations. And the President has circulated a document to the Security Council to refute these allegations categorically, and has sent to the President of the Security Council the same document, asking him to circulate it to all members. Careful examination of the documentation which we have provided you will show clearly the magnitude, quality, and efficiency of the efforts undertaken by the DRC in the last 5 years in order to combat the FDLR, which would have been completely neutralized had it not been for the unleashing of the M23 rebellion. It is noteworthy that a positive evaluation was certified by non-Congolese experts who cannot very easily be accused of complacency in this area, i.e. MONUSCO, but especially those very same people who today, through their accusations, seem to be reneging on their signature. It's also worth noting that no country in the region of the Great Lakes has, as much as the DRC, militated in favor of the creation of an intervention brigade with mission of neutralizing all negative forces, including the FDLR, and to grant an offensive mandate to this brigade. It should also be clearly understood, moreover, that the Democratic Republic of Congo, more than any other, has a people who have been suffering violence due to the presence of foreign armed groups on its territory, could not entertain the notion of any cooperation with those forces who stand out due to their killings, their rapes, violence of all nature, pillaging of public and private access, and of natural resources. And it is thus my place to solemnly affirm that the Democratic Republic of Congo has never wavered and will continue to scrupulously respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of other states in the region, as well as the sacrosanct principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of these other countries. Turning now to the involvement of some elements of the FARDC, in light of what I have just said with regard to our scrupulous respect of the sovereignty and integrity of other countries in the region, I would like to say that their implication in the violations of human rights in Minova, you should know that this case has been brought to court, and the members of the FARDC who are convicted will be severely punished regardless of their rank. Turning now to recent allegations with regard to abuse of prisoners, inhumane and degrading treatment, profaning the dead, is investigations have been launched in order to establish the truth. Justice will be just as merciless vis-a-vis these offenders if they are convicted. I should, however, underscore here that these allegations are surprising, to say the very least. Surprising because if this type of human rights violation in the past had been established as something undertaken by the rebellion and those responsible of the M23 rebellions, it would be the first time in 15 years, however, that in fighting these rebellions, the regular army of the DRC would be subject to such accusations. And that's what we can say about the credibility of them. Mr. President, as you can note for yourself, the Democratic Republic of Congo has made significant progress in implementing its commitments. This puts us in a legitimate situation of having expectations of like commitment both from our international and regional partners. The deployment on the ground of the Intervention Brigade instituted by Resolution 2098 is clear progress, and we appreciate it. Our desire henceforth is to see the brigade swiftly and efficiently begin its mission confided to it by the Security Council, which is surveillance and securization of the borders of the DRC with its neighbors in the east, and neutralization of all negative forces without exclusion. Having said that, we're aware that the military force could not alone resolve the complex peace equation of the Great Lakes region in Africa, nor could it separate out the conflicts and disputes which are all interlocked with each other. The sources of them are also overlapping and are both external and internal. Given the extremism of almost all the negative forces in the region, force is thus necessary, but not sufficient. To be lasting, a solution must include sincere dialogue amongst all internal and external parties, application of good faith, and the conclusion of these parties should be implemented with good faith. And that's why, as far as we're concerned, we, the DRC, we remain actively involved in talks with Kampala. We would like, however, to underscore that given our experience with agreements concluded with the rebels in 2003, 2006, and 2009, rebels who for the most part have been recycled into M23, and in keeping with the relevant resolutions of the Security Councils, we could not sign an agreement that would enshrine impunity and reintegrate into the armed forces people who had been subject to judiciary action or international sanctions due to massive violations of human rights, war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity. To do that, would set the stage for another breakdown of peace and more instability. Mr. President, the suffering of the past, which no one is ignoring and no one is minimizing, regardless of the wounds, regardless of the horrors, could not be indefinitely something that would lock us into a position without any escape. Without forgetting the past, we must emphasize reconciliation and cohesion within our states, peaceful cohabitation and cooperation. History and geography compel us to it. So do survival and lasting and sustainable development. The Democratic Republic of Congo will never abandon to anyone the least square inch of its territory, nor will it give up any part of its sovereignty over its wealth. It is, however, prepared today, as yesterday, to conclude a covenant for peace, stability, and development in the region of the Great Lakes as a whole, and with this in mind, to develop regional cooperation. Others before us have been able to, even knowing the proof and the situation similar to that of ours, they have been able to and been capable of renouncing the imposition of indefinite vengeance. Their prosperity and their current cordial understanding should be a source of inspiration to us all. The peoples of the Great Lakes region in Africa have, like those around the world, a right to peace and prosperity. By reiterating our congratulations and gratitude to you, I beg you thus to have faith, Mr. President, in the unwavering determination of His Excellency Joseph Kabila Kabango, President of the Republic, to work for sustainable peace in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foreign Minister. I appreciate those last comments and also the importance of your statement, and we thank you today. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Louise Mushikiwabo, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the Republic of Rwanda.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Kerry, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Let me begin by thanking the United States and you, Secretary Kerry, for convening this most important debate in support of the peace, security, and cooperation framework and for the presidential statement just adopted. Allow me also to thank the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for his statement, as well as the World Bank's President, Dr. Jim Yong Kim, and Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region of Africa, Mary Robinson, for their valued contributions and statements this morning. Taken together, their extraordinary efforts, exhausting travel schedules, and financial commitments to regional development priorities amply demonstrate their sincere commitment to the peace, security, and cooperation framework that we're discussing this morning. It is a visionary, comprehensive, and inclusive strategy to end decades of conflict and instability in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. I also thank the AU Commissioner, Ramtan Lamamra, for his revealing briefing and regional efforts undertaken by the African Union towards finding peace in the Great Lakes region. I also acknowledge the presence of honorable ministers from countries of our region and from fellow council members. Rwanda warmly welcomes the new Special Envoy of the United States to the Great Lakes region, Russ Feingold, and the new SRSG, as well as the new Force Commander of MONUSCO. I wish to assure all of you, as a team, of Rwanda's total collaboration for our common pursuit of peace for our region. Mr. President, while Rwanda is very pleased to support the presidential statement, we nonetheless would have loved to see efforts of the region included in the statement, particularly in support of the Kampala peace talks established under the auspices of the International Conference of the Great Lakes region. Indeed, we would like the United Nations Special Envoy Mary Robinson to play an active role in seeing through the Kampala talks without any further delay so that we can move quickly to pacifying the Kivu region. Her engagement would be a welcome and helpful contribution to moving forward. We have gathered today, Mr. President, out of a shared determination to make peace in the Great Lakes region a lasting reality. Having endured devastating conflict within our own borders nearly 2 decades ago, the people of Rwanda have worked tirelessly to rebuild a peaceful and thriving nation, but we're also very aware that our destiny is inextricably tied to that of our neighbors. Let me put it in the clearest possible terms. In order to secure long-term peace and prosperity for Rwanda into the future, we need a peaceful and prosperous Democratic Republic of the Congo. And as long as conditions persist that allow more than 30 rebel groups to roam in eastern DRC with impunity, or as long as men and boys who see nothing in their future beyond crime, violence, and conflict, such a transformation will remain beyond reach. This framework of hope, along with regional peace efforts, opens a special door to that kind of profound and necessary change that is needed for the DRC and for our entire region. Rwanda is eager to do its part and live up to its commitment as a neighbor and a regional partner, as well as through this framework of hope. Allow me to lay out some concrete actions my government has taken so far in implementing this framework. We have disarmed, interned, and relocated away from the DRC border more than 600 M23 combatants who crossed into Rwanda as a result of infighting in March 2013. In his report dated June 28th, the Secretary General commended Rwanda for the positive role it played in that regard. We have asked the United Nations to take responsibility for these combatants, and it is important to note that Rwanda cannot bear this burden alone. We invite the international community to devise and implement a long-term solution for this group of former combatants. Rwanda has also worked with the United Nations to accommodate roughly 70,000 Congolese nationals who have sought refuge in Rwanda for more than 13 years now, and to take the necessary steps to ensure their safe return home as soon as possible. In addition, as the Secretary General mentioned in his report on the implementation of the PSC framework, the government of Rwanda reported the presence of several high-ranking M23 members who crossed the border from the Democratic Republic of Congo seeking refuge in Rwanda, including UN-sanctioned individuals. When M23 leader General Bosco Ntaganda surrendered to the U.S. Embassy in Kigali on March 18th, earlier this year, Rwandan authorities offered facilitation for his transfer to The Hague through the U.S. and Dutch embassies in Kigali. We can all agree that the economic component of the framework must be implemented alongside its political and security aspects. And to that end, Rwanda is working to boost regional cooperation through enhanced economic integration and close collaboration in cross-border trade with the DRC and our other neighbors in the Great Lakes region. Just last month, Rwanda mining authorities seized 8.4 metric tons of smuggled minerals and are in the process of returning them to the DRC authorities, and as that has been the practice in the past. We are also exploring several other opportunities for economic cooperation, including a strategic bilateral project with the Democratic Republic of Congo on our shared Lake Kivu. Finally, Rwanda supported and has been facilitating the deployment of the Intervention Brigade, and we did so because we believe that it could help pacify the region and serve as a strong deterrent against the multiple armed groups in the eastern DRC, therefore allowing MONUSCO to carry out its protection of civilians responsibility and critically create the space necessary to implement the peace and security framework, as well as facilitate other regional peace efforts. Mr. President, as a Special Envoy Mary Robinson has stressed in the past, this framework is a shared endeavor, and its success depends very much on each party living up to their respective commitments. And I take the opportunity of this meeting in this chamber this morning to reiterate Rwanda's commitment to this framework. We are one of the 11 countries who make up the expanded joint verification mechanism by which developments in conflict-affected areas are examined thoroughly and with transparency and accountability. We therefore urge the Security Council to attach value to the work of the expanded joint verification mechanism and for their findings to inform the decisions we reach and resolutions we agree to. On the recent FDLR FARDC collusion, Rwanda remains seriously concerned. The Security Council has received a letter referenced document S/2013/402 from my government with details, so I will not repeat the specifics here today, simply to say that it is a concern that needs to be addressed. While Rwanda views any alliance between the FDLR and the FARDC as a threat to regional security, however, we will not allow these disturbing developments to derail our commitment to this peace, as we have done in the past. Mr. President, I cannot stress enough Rwanda's goodwill and ongoing support for the peace, security, and cooperation framework. We believe it offers a realistic path to lasting peace and security for the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Great Lakes region at large. But we must not veer off course, and we must understand that this vision is only achievable alongside regional peace initiatives, as well as genuine political will on the part of all affected states. Further, the international peacekeeping force in the DRC is forging uncharted territory with the deployment of an intervention brigade as well as unmanned aerial vehicles. UN peacekeepers must take great care to respect all relevant international laws and adhere strictly to their mandate. Since the consequences of instability in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo fall so heavily on Rwanda, as it has been the case in almost the last 20 years, we are eager to take full advantage of this historic opportunity for peace and security, and despite the serious risks I have outlined this morning, we can see early signs of progress that are not mistakable. A plan, Mr. President, without action is just words. And when it comes to the Eastern DRC, there have been enough words. There has been enough speeches and report writing. And there has been more than enough grandstanding, especially by unaccountable actors who seek profit and publicity from the region's misery. It is time for such forces to move aside and allow the framework of hope to move forward. This is the time for accountable parties to stand up and step forward, and now is the time for action. I thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Minister. We appreciate your comments, and I look forward to my meetings on the side of this gathering with both you as well as with your counterpart from the DRC. So thank you for your statement. I give the floor now to His Excellency Mr. Jean Asselborn, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Luxembourg.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. President. Luxembourg welcomes the initiative taken by the United States to convene this high-level debate of the Security Council on the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Great Lakes region. This debate is particularly timely, and your presence, Mr. Secretary of State, gives it special significance. I'd like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Special Envoy Mary Robinson, the President of the World Bank, Mr. Kim, the Commissioner for Peace and Security in the African Union, Mr. Lamambra, as well as the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the DRC and Uganda for their statements, and, above all, for their frank commitment to peace, security, and cooperation in the region. Luxembourg fully subscribes to the statement to be delivered by Pierre Vimont for the European Union. Mr. President, the DRC and the Great Lakes region have for too long been ravaged by conflict. Millions of people have died, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Congo stated. That is 6 million deaths over the past 15 years, and millions of displaced persons and individuals unable to live in dignity, and armed groups, notably the M23, which continue to plague the eastern DRC. This is no longer acceptable. Things must change. You must break the cycle of violence. It is our hope that the peace, security, and cooperation framework signed in the 11+4 format in Addis Ababa on 24 February will prove to be a turning point in the shoring up of peace and stability in the region. This agreement would not have been possible, nor its follow-up be ensured, without the support of the United Nations. I very much welcome the crucial role played here by the Secretary General and his team. We would also like to thank the African Union for their support, as well as the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region and the South African Development Community. The PSC framework has one distinct merit, that is, it takes into account the root causes of conflict and rightly emphasizes the ownership of the countries of the region in a process which must break the cycle of reoccurring violence and pave the way for truly dynamic regional economic development. We would like this agreement to live up to the name that has been given to it by Mary Robinson, inspired by the Irish poet Seamus Heaney. A framework of hope. A framework which can bring back hope to the people of the DRC and the region, as well as leave behind the current horrors of the situation today. Mr. President, it is now time for the firm implementation of the PSC framework. In this context, we welcome the recent initiatives taken by the DRC. The National Oversight Mechanism will monitor the implementation of the commitments made under the PSC framework. The first national plans for security sector reform, particularly the reform of the Army, have been presented. We also welcome the establishment of a new independent National Electoral Commission. This paves the way for organizing provincial and local elections. Setting up a professional and loyal national army that can protect the territory of the DRC and promote human rights is also paramount. In this connection, it devolves upon the DRC authorities to continue their investigations into violations of international humanitarian law and human rights, in particular sexual violence perpetrated by elements of the DRC armed forces. The implementation of the action plan signed on 4 October 2012 with the UN in order to halt and prevent the recruitment and use of children, as well as sexual violence committed against children by national armed forces and security forces, all of these efforts must be seen in the same context. We would also recall that the signing of the framework went hand in hand with an overhaul of MONUSCO, including with the establishment of an intervention brigade. The deterrent impact of the brigade has already been felt on the ground, and we are pleased with this. Pursuant to Resolution 2098, the brigade will have a key role to play in contributing to the objective of reducing the threat posed by armed groups to the authority of state and to the safety of civilians in the eastern DRC. Support to SSR and the protection of civilians, in particular women and children, must remain at the heart of MONUSCO's mandate. President, on the regional level, we support the proactive approach of the Special Envoy Mary Robinson and her intention to design, in the forthcoming months, a comprehensive political strategy, this for the implementation of the framework based on indicators agreed upon by all signatories. Vigilance is indeed required to sustain the positive momentum here. The follow-up, orchestrated by Mrs. Robinson, will have to benefit from the continual attention of our Council. A point of particular concern, in our view, is the continued illegal exploitation and illicit trade in natural resources in eastern DRC, in particular by armed groups. This trafficking is a major source of instability. We welcome positive steps taken by the Congolese authorities in this field. In general, we encourage them to scale up their efforts in the area of economic governance, as stated within the PSC framework. It is important to strengthen regional cooperation, including by deepening economic integration with special consideration for the exploitation of natural resources. Finally, allow me to stress the importance for partners of the region to focus on development cooperation and the fight against poverty. Indeed, security and development do go hand in hand. I encourage the World Bank and the countries of the region to quickly implement their projects to support regional development priorities following President Kim's announcement on 23 May in Kinshasa, that is a pledge of $1 billion at zero interest loans. I have in mind specifically projects in the area of agricultural, hydroelectric power, and infrastructure for the expansion of cross-border economic activity. As Madam Mary Robinson noted, the ongoing political process will only succeed if people quickly benefit from tangible peace dividends. Mr. President, in conclusion, allow me to reiterate the call on the signatories of the PSC framework to implement in good faith and with diligence all commitments to which they have committed, including that of neither tolerating nor providing assistance or support of any kind to armed groups. It is a matter of responsibility and credibility. In doing so, they can count on the support of the international community in order to initiate an upward spiral, which will allow the people of the region to emerge finally from an unacceptable situation which has lasted for too long. This opportunity is exceptional and must be seized upon now. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Minister Asselborn for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Fernando Carrera, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Guatemala.
Thank you. Señor Presidente, muchas gracias. Han transcurrido 13 años desde que las Naciones Unidas establecieron una misión de mantenimiento de la...
Mr. President, 13 years have elapsed since the United Nations established a peacekeeping operation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. My own country has participated in this mission as a troop contributor since 2005. Indeed, we lost 8 soldiers in a well-known incident that took place in the Garamba National Park in January of 2006. Allow me, Mr. President, if I may, to recall their names at this time. Abelino Pop, Ramon Chiche, Edgar Morales Guzman, Valeriano Raxus, Calixto Gomez Perez, Mario Rodríguez Tecal, Teodoro Tilón Pau, and Orlando Augusto Hernández Alonso. 5 of those soldiers were of Mayan descent and Guatemalan and were on the path for peace and security in the region. In spite of this long history, the signing on the 24th of February of the Peace, Security, and Cooperation Framework Agreement has opened the way for renewed vigor for efforts aimed at achieving peace, stability, and prosperity in the Great Lakes region and in general and in the DRC in particular. It is for this reason that we find today's debate timely and relevant, and for this we thank your delegation, United States, and Secretary Kerry for having proposed it and for having circulated a concept note on the matter. We also appreciate your gesture, Secretary Kerry, of personally presiding our meeting. We also greatly value the presence of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the President of the World Bank, Jim Yong Kim, and we would like to thank them for their presentations. We also appreciate the presentations of Madam Mary Robinson, the Special Envoy, and the head of the Peace and Security Commission of the African Union. Mr. President, the report presented by the Secretary General, which serves as a background document to this meeting, refers to the relatively encouraging expectations of today that the protracted crisis in the DRC, and especially in the eastern part of the country, can be resolved in the broader context that shapes the future of the Great Lakes region. Despite numerous obstacles, which the report also describes in a rather frank manner, we agree with the assessment of the Secretary General and with the words of the Special Envoy, Mary Robinson. I would like to highlight some of the elements that support our cautious optimism. First, although the framework involves commitments both for the government of the DRC and for other countries in the region, as well as for the international community, it is clear that primary responsibility falls squarely on the Democratic Republic of Congo's government, as well it should. This model of the host country serving as the main protagonist and the international community in a complementary role has emerged as a paradigm of development in recent times, and even serves as inspiration for the Millennium Development Goals. Second, the commitment to address the root causes of the conflict in an integrated and holistic manner, including the economic, social, political, governance, and security issues, also appears to be indispensable if our goal is to restore stability and overcome the violence that afflicts this country. Third, it is comforting to note the presence of 11 countries and 4 multilateral institutions involved in the Framework Agreement on Peace, Security, and Cooperation. It is our view that the establishment of the oversight mechanism, called the 11+4 mechanism, shores up expectations that commitments undertaken by all parties will be met. Fourth, we applaud the partnerships which the United Nations has built with regional and sub-regional entities of the African continent. In this specific case, with the African Union, the International Conference of the Great Lakes, the South African Development Community. We view the synchronized and cooperative work of these multilateral entities, each in its own specific purview, as something of special importance. Fifth, and along the same lines, we applaud the joint initiative of the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the World Bank to undertake a joint mission to the region of the Great Lakes and to appear jointly before us. It is difficult to conceive of progress economically and socially without involving multilateral financial institutions. We are pleased that in addressing these problems in a holistic and integrated manner, each entity can respond according to its specialty, not only within the United Nations, but also within the United Nations system and between the latter and other multilateral bodies. We also continue to hope that the new expression of cooperation between the United Nations and the World Bank will extend to the agendas of ECOSOC, the Peacebuilding Commission, and the General Assembly. Sixth, as it is known, my delegation has seen this not just as the arm of peace and development, but also the arm of finance. They go hand in hand. Sixth, as is known, my delegation has expressed its reservations regarding the new trend of this Council to assign peace enforcement duties to missions conceived under the cardinal principles that have shaped their peacekeeping mandates, including, especially, the principle of impartiality. However, in spite of those reservations, ultimately, we accepted the incorporation of the so-called Intervention Brigade into MONUSCOs as the lesser of two evils, given the imminent threat to the civilian population by the M23 and other militant groups in eastern DRC, and with the understanding that this would be a stopgap measure. In any case, it's important to not forget that to build states, to build democracies, or to build nations is not a job for the international community. It's the job for sovereign states. To conclude, I would like to refer to the fact that just a month ago we were in this very room reading a resolution and recalling a resolution on sexual violence and against women and children in armed conflict situations, which means that Resolution 2098 of this Council is one that was passed under the United Kingdom's president as fundamental, and we should not forget the words of that resolution, which would serve as words for peace for the DRC. I hope, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, that we are on the peace path at this moment and that we will continue progressing towards prosperity and development for a region that needs it in an ongoing manner. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Minister Carrera for his statement and give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pascal Canfin, Minister Delegate for Development of France.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. President of the World Bank, Madam Special Envoy, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, Allow me on behalf of France to most warmly thank the Secretary of State, Mr. John Kerry, for having undertaken the initiative to convene this high-level meeting on the situation in the Great Lakes region, in particular in the DRC. As others said, this meeting is timely. At a time when the humanitarian situation continues to be tragic, with more than 2.2 million displaced persons in DRC and 450,000 in neighboring countries, these last months have been characterized by a new spike in hostilities undertaken by the M23 and other armed groups against the DRC armed forces. This resumption of hostilities is a test for the international community. It is a test because the M23 and other armed groups are seeking simply to derail the political process underway. It is a political process which indeed seeks to halt this tragedy, which has lasted for far too long. It is a test because some players might be tempted to renege on their commitments. But our message is clear. Neighboring countries in that region must stop support to armed groups, as they've committed to do. This firm, united message is being sent by the international community today. And it is healthy. And it is healthy because it will support the commitments of players to sustainable peace in the Great Lakes region. Ladies and gentlemen, we've made much progress over these past months. Now we have a consistent framework, one which allows us to hope that the tragedy in the Great Lakes will be halted after more than 20 years. Now, this framework is based on two pillars. The first is the framework agreement signed on 24 February last by 11 countries of the region upon the Secretary General's initiative. And I would like to thank the SG here for his action and determination. Now, it is the responsibility of the signatories to implement their commitments. Over these past weeks, we've seen many encouraging signs. The DRC government's adoption of a national follow-up mechanism. This is a step forward towards crucial reforms of the Congolese police and army. Now, full-scale measures must be undertaken as swiftly as possible. It is also important for the Congolese army to act in an exemplary manner on the ground, and that the atrocities committed by the army, which are not excusable, be effectively and severely punished by the justice system of the country. Now, on a regional level, a first meeting of the regional follow-up mechanism on 26 May, on the margins of the African Union Summit, brought together the majority of heads of states of the region. This mechanism, first and foremost, must guarantee that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states of the region be upheld, beginning with that of the DRC. But also, it must guarantee that their security not be threatened. The actions of Madam Mary Robinson, Special Envoy of the SG for the Great Lakes region, will be most crucial for the assessment and follow-up to national and regional efforts in the implementation of commitments or obligations. Madam President, rest assured of the firm support of France, which remains at your side. The second pillar of this new climate is Resolution 2098 of the Security Council, adopted unanimously on 28 March last. The heart of MONUSCO's mandate has not changed. It remains the protection of civilians. However, so as to further objective, in an hitherto unseen manner, the resolution authorizes the deployment of an intervention brigade, which has the mandate of neutralizing armed groups who engage in violence and threaten civilians. Now, France would like this brigade to become operational as quickly as possible. Another essential point of 2098 is the matter of sexual violence. Sexual violence continues to be a weapon of war and used in a broad-spread manner and usually with all impunity. Here we welcome the initiative of Madam Mary Robinson to organize with the ICGLR a specific conference on the role of women in the process of the Framework Agreement implementation. And we welcome the fact that in this we deplore the fact that the heart of women in this region is often a field of war for men, and we do agree that this is a stain on our conscience. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to touch on the matter of development before concluding. As Madam Mary Robinson noted, it is time now to plan for peace dividends for the whole region. I welcome the personal commitment of President Kim in resolving this crisis, as well as the recent World Bank pledge for the implementation of the DRC's commitments undertaken during the signing of the Framework Agreement. France and the EU will also contribute to the development of the region. The relaunching of the economies of the region will also mean transparency in the exploitation of natural resources. Lacking transparency in mining resources must cede its place to transparency. And as you know, upon the UK initiative and with France's full support, the countries of the G8 adopted in the beginning of the month an action plan for transparency in the for extractive industries. Moreover, we do intend to fully politically and technically support the DRC's efforts to establish a certification mechanism for mining minerals in the region. All of these tools will allow us to combat bad practices, as well as to increase the benefits gleaned from mining resources for people in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, at a time where the M23 conducts attacks on Goma, it is important today to spare no effort so as to defeat those who would challenge peace and relaunch the political dynamism stemming from the Framework Agreement. So as to allow for lasting peace, the time has come for all players in the region to cooperate in the face of violence and looting. It is only if this happens that the Framework Agreement can pave the way for an improvement in the security situation and the lives of people in the Great Lakes region. On behalf of the millions of people who have engulfed the region in sadness over many years, today we have an obligation to succeed. Thank you, Madam.
Mr. Delegate Confin for his statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kofi Essau, Minister, Senior Advisor to the President of the Republic for Diplomatic Matters and Cooperation of Togo.
Madam President, I would like to thank your country for organizing this high-level debate on the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Great Lakes region. And I'd also like to applaud the presence of the Secretary of State to lead this debate. I would also like to commend the Secretary General on his presence and thank him for his sustained efforts in the quest for sustainable peace, a sustainable solution to this conflict in the region, and I'd like to congratulate him on his statement. Finally, I would like to say that I welcome the participation of the President of the World Bank and the high-level representatives of the African Union and ministers of the region of the Great Lakes, as well as the other ministers at this debate. Holding this debate is tangible proof of the significance attached to the resolution of recurrent conflicts in the DRC by this Council and collectively all member states. In this regard, I would like to applaud the appointment on the 18th of June last of Mr. Russ Feingold as the Special Envoy of the United States for the Great Lakes region. Mr. President, it is on this note of optimism that I begin my remarks by echoing the statement made by the Secretary General of the United Nations and the President of the World Bank in a common statement entitled Peace Just Within Reach, on the eve of a joint mission to the DRC and some of the countries in the region. Togo shares this optimism, and after more than a decade of suffering, the peoples of the Great Lake region deserve to finally see peace restored. And this is why my country would like to express its recognition to the heads of state of the International Conference on the Region of the Great Lakes, to the community of South African states and the African Union, but also to the Secretary General of the United Nations and our own Council for their joint and determined action in order to put an end to massive violations of human rights in the eastern part of the DRC, especially sexual violence and rape, which have become weapons of war. And I'd like to most particularly welcome the framework agreement signed on the 24th of February with the support of the United Nations, through which 11 heads of state in the region have undertaken commitments to act by working together to meet common challenges in security, governance, and socioeconomic development. It is also important that all the signatories of the agreement put their good faith in the provisions of this agreement. And it goes without saying that the key role must be played by the DRC in order to successfully build a new peace architecture, which must be done slowly but surely, and we congratulate the authorities of this country for actions already undertaken in that direction. However, the efforts must be continued, especially in the area of security sector reform, protection of civilians, especially women and children, by arresting offenders and those who order crimes to be committed, regardless of who they are, and thereby put an end to the reign of impunity. Moreover, Togo welcomes once again the adoption by the Council of Resolution 2098, which authorizes the deployment of the Intervention Brigade, which is charged with fighting armed groups in the east of the DRC. Increased support to MONUSCO should enable this special unit to achieve the goal set forth for it. Mr. President, we applaud remarkable progress achieved in the DRC, and yet we must condemn the acts of the M23, which has led to current hostilities between the rebels and the Congolese army. If the peace process is to be continued without impediment, it is also important that the armed forces of the DRC and the Rwandan defense forces work together in order to neutralize the FDLR so they can no longer do harm and bring about security on the Rwandan-Congolese border and good relations between the two countries, all of which are harmed by the FDLR. Mr. President, hunger and poverty accelerate the whole dynamic behind violence. It is hunger and poverty that lead to the recruitment of young people out of work who are desperate and get involved in armed groups. And that is why Togo is pleased that the international community has integrated the development factor and the economic integration factor at a regional level in its overall strategy to resolve the conflict in this region. And in this regard, the World Bank deserves all of our recognition and appreciation in having pointing the way for us to follow. The DRC and the Great Lakes region can, like other African countries, recover from conflict and work towards the Millennium Development Goals, and their populations deserve a chance to work with the international community. Thank you.
Statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Azerbaijan.
Thank you. Madam President, at the outset, I would like to thank the United States Presidency on convening this debate on the situation in the Great Lakes region. We welcome the presence at this very important meeting of United States Secretary of State, His Excellency John Kerry, and other high-level officials. We are also grateful to the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, World Bank President Jim Yong Kim, Special Envoy Mary Robinson, EU Commissioner Ramante Lamamra, and Ministers for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda for their statements. Today's meeting is being held against the background of renewed hostilities initiated by the M23 movement in Eastern DRC. Azerbaijan condemns attacks by the rebel group, which caused civilian casualties and displacements and undermined regional and international efforts towards a negotiated resolution of the conflict. Indeed, the situation in Eastern DRC, particularly destabilizing activities of the armed groups, grave human rights violations and abuses in conflict-affected areas, and the humanitarian impact of the crisis represent the most significant challenges. Concerns about the increasingly difficult political environment and security situation in the country require redoubled efforts at the national and international levels. The signing of the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the DRC and the region on 24 February 2013 was undoubtedly an important achievement that added new impetus to the diplomatic and political efforts and raised expectations that the crisis in Eastern DRC could be resolved. It is important that all relevant actors involved consistently demonstrate the necessary political will and spare no efforts to translate the goals of the framework into tangible outcomes. What has been clear at the outset is that the diplomatic and political efforts should in no way lead to the consolidation of illegal actions and be seen as an opportunity for endless discussion of unsubstantial and unacceptable claims, as it is the case in some other situations of armed conflict. It is critical that responsibility and accountability, as these notions are understood in international law, have been from the very beginning among key elements guiding the common approach of the international community. In its presidential statement released today, the Security Council demanded that all armed groups cease immediately all form of violence and that their members fully disband and disarm, as well as emphasized the renewed commitment of all countries to neither tolerate nor provide assistance or support of any kind to armed groups. We also welcome the Council's principal stand on the need to end impunity for violation of international humanitarian and human rights law committed during the conflict. The Intervention Brigade is an essential element of efforts to address the threat posed by the presence of armed groups in Eastern DRC. At the same time, it's clear that the conflict in DRC cannot be resolved by military means alone. Being complementary to the political process, the impact of the Intervention Brigade will be effectively only if the national and regional commitments under the PSC framework are properly and timely implemented. Important prerequisite of the conflict resolution in DRC is regional support. We commend the African Union, the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, and other regional actors, as well the countries of the region, for their contribution to finding a lasting solution to the conflict. It is crucial that they continue to work together towards the implementation of the PSC framework. It's also imperative that all countries of the region respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of each other, as well as the principle of non-interference, good neighborliness, and regional cooperation. We welcome the initial steps taken by the government of DRC to fulfill its commitments under the PSC framework, including those aimed at ending impunity for serious human rights violations and abuses and moving forward on the security sector reform. These efforts will undoubtedly contribute to strengthening the population's confidence in the state's institutions and help lay a solid foundation for the development of the country. The sustained engagement and support of the international community are crucial in promoting stability in the DRC and the entire region. We commend the personal efforts of the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and his Special Envoy Mary Robinson. The joint visit of the Secretary General and the President of the World Bank Group and the announcement of a development package of $1 billion by the World Bank added the potential for a significant incentives in moving the peace agenda and prospects of enhanced regional integration forward. Greater coordination among donors is essential to ensure that assistance supports national and regional efforts to address the root causes of the conflict. Azerbaijan also commends the contribution of MONUSCO and the Troop contributing countries to maintaining peace, security and stability in the DRC and strongly condemns all attacks against peacekeepers. In conclusion, Madam President, I would like once again to thank you for convening this important debate, which provided a useful opportunity to reiterate the international community's sustained engagement on the Great Lakes issue and its strong support to the Framework Initiative. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Azerbaijan for his statement and give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, China appreciates the U.S. initiative to convene this open debate on the situation in the Great Lakes region. We welcome Secretary of State Kerry to preside over today's meeting. I thank Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, President Jim Yong Kim, and Special Envoy Robinson for their briefings. I have listened attentively to the statements by AU and the regional countries. The Great Lakes region is situated at the center of the African continent and is endowed with natural resources, long history, and rich cultures. It holds unique development potentials and advantages. However, due to factors such as instability in the regional security situation, the protracted disputes and conflicts, security and development in the Great Lakes region have encountered constraints and difficulties. It is encouraging that in last February, thanks to the joint efforts of regional countries, in particular Secretary General Ban Ki-moon's initiative, the countries in the Great Lakes region signed the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework for the DRC and the region, marking an important step by regional countries in resolving disputes by themselves and achieving regional peace and development through cooperation. Peace and development in the Great Lakes region is presented with an important opportunity. China highly appreciates the efforts of countries in the Great Lakes region in implementing the framework agreement. We hope all parties will proceed from a common and long-term interests of safeguarding regional peace and development, show determination, garner consensus, implement their commitments in good faith, resolve once for all their regional disputes and conflicts, and embark at an early date on the path of lasting peace and sustainable development. To this end, I would like to highlight the following 4 points. First, it is crucial to keep up with the positive momentum of fully implementing the framework agreement. The urgent task now is full cessation of hostilities and restoring stability in Eastern DRC. Armed groups should voice their grievances through dialogues and negotiations and conclude agreements with DRC government on ending violence so as to create conditions for easing humanitarian situation in Eastern DRC. Second, the support of DRC government in strengthening capacity building in providing security should be the focus of the framework agreement implementation. China welcomes the setting up of national oversight mechanism by DRC government to implement the framework agreement. DRC armed forces should assume primary responsibility for safeguarding national security and protecting civilians. The intervention brigade of MONUSCO should assist and support DRC armed forces in responding to threats from armed groups within the mandate of the Security Council. Third, cooperation through dialogue and rebuilding of mutual trust among countries in the Great Lakes region is vital for restoring peace and stability in the region and achieving common development. We hope the regional countries will, based on mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity through 11+4 oversight mechanism of the Framework Agreement, the International Conference of the Great Lakes Region, joint verification mechanism, strengthen communication and cooperation, participate actively in drafting regional benchmarks of the Framework Agreement, and commit themselves to peace and development in the region. Fourth, the international community should scale up its support and assistance and contribute positively to the long-term peace and stability in the Great Lakes region. We hope that UN will work with AU, ICGLR, and other regional mechanisms, strengthen coordination, form synergy, and push parties towards honoring their commitments to the Framework Agreement by taking action. We also hope that the $1 billion pledge of the World Bank to the Great Lakes region will be quickly disbursed to support the regional countries in developing national economies, improving people's livelihoods, and achieving lasting peace. Madam President, as stated by China's President Xi Jinping during his recent visit to Africa last March, China is confident that the difficulties and ups and downs some regions of Africa are experiencing will by no means stop the steady advances of the continent towards peace, development, and progress. China remains Africa's all-weather friend and partner. We will be steadfast in supporting the African states in their efforts to safeguard sovereignty and resolve the African issues by themselves. I would like to reiterate here that we have all along been actively supporting the countries in the Great Lakes region in advancing peace. For many years, China has been participating in the UN peacekeeping mission in DRC and has made unremitting efforts towards maintaining security and stability in the country. We are ready to work with the regional countries and the international community in contributing positively to freeing the people of the Great Lakes region from sufferings inflicted by wars and conflicts and to achieving peace, stability, and development at an early date. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Madam President, we thank Secretary of State John Kerry for presiding over the special session of the Council. The United States initiative gives a fresh impetus to the quest for peace and security in the DRC and its neighborhood. Today's debate brought together the Secretary General, President of the World Bank, Special Envoy Mary Robinson, and leaders from the region. This is synergy in action. We pay special tribute to the Secretary General, who, despite heavy odds and some setbacks, assembled leaders of 11 countries and 4 guarantors, the United Nations, African Union, ICGLR, and SADC, for the common cause of peace and stability in the Great Lakes region. This is a big picture approach. The big picture requires that countries in the region must build a strong nexus between peace and development. There can be no development without peace in the region. Regional economic integration should replace the toxic legacy of pogroms and reign of terror imposed by militias and armed groups. The PSC framework holds the promise to deliver peace. Special Envoy Mary Robinson has testified that some progress is being made. We should maintain the momentum generated by positive developments. Madam President, the big picture dictates that killings must end. Violations of international human and humanitarian law, such as executions, sexual violence, and forced recruitments, must cease. Impunity should not be condoned. Perpetrators should be made accountable. The Intervention Brigade under MONUSCO is being deployed. It must succeed. The brigade is one of the tools of the overall strategy to act as a deterrent. It is not meant to be a substitute for the Congolese army, nor a panacea for the problems in Eastern DRC. As this Council's Resolution 2098 underlines, ultimately, a well-trained and adequately equipped rapid reaction force within the Congolese army would take over the responsibilities of this brigade. MONUSCO remains a keystone of the new strategy. We all know that the process of implementation of the framework is not going to be easy. It is important that DRC's neighbors and regional partners are fully on board and they implement the framework in good faith. It is also critical that all countries respect sovereignty and territorial integrity of the neighboring states. Credible and verifiable measures should be taken to disarm, disband, and demobilize groups that defy the writ of the state. Allegations can be investigated and truth established. Realistic and time-bound benchmarks should be developed to monitor the progress in the implementation of the framework. Madam President, we welcome the initial steps taken by the government of DRC to implement the PSC framework and establish the national oversight mechanism. The responsibility of the maintenance of peace and security in the eastern DRC should be gradually transferred to its armed forces and police. The DRC should expand security sector reform, consolidate state authority, and work towards national reconciliation. Madam President, Pakistan is strongly committed to the goals of peace and stability in the DRC and Great Lakes region. Pakistani peacekeepers in MONUSCO have played an important role to restore and bolster stability in the DRC. They have carried out daring operations against armed groups, contributed to the training and capacity building of the Congolese National Security Forces, and worked in community welfare projects. Many of our soldiers have laid down their lives on the DRC soil. Our peacekeepers will continue to protect civilians and implement MONUSCO's mandate. Madam President, we hope that there will be a new dawn for the people of the Great Lakes region. This century is Africa's century. As Africa moves towards robust economic growth and attains political clout, the Great Lakes region should not be held back by strife and conflict. Illicit exploitation of minerals should stop. The rich resources of the region should now be harnessed for the benefit of its people. The countries of the region should assume their rightful place in Africa and the Comity of Nations. The Great Lakes region should become an arc of stability and prosperity in the continent, and the United Nations should succeed in its mission. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Madam President, at the outset, I would like to express my sincere appreciation for the initiative of the U.S. Presidency in convening today's ministerial meeting. We welcome Secretary of State John Kerry and his chairing today's meeting. I also wish to thank the Secretary General, President of World Bank, as well as Special Envoy Mary Robinson and Commissioner Ramthan Ramamra for their participation and presentations. We also appreciate the high-level presence of ministers from the members of the Security Council and the Great Lakes region. We are confident that today's gathering will provide an excellent opportunity to review the progress thus far and further bolster the momentum for achieving sustainable peace and development in the DRC and the region as a whole. Madam President, the PSC framework constitutes a strong political foundation for the region's lasting peace and stability. The participating countries should share a common responsibility to implement the commitments of the PSC framework. Full and uninterrupted implementation by all concerned parties at the national, regional, and international level should be ensured. The government of the DRC holds the primary responsibility for its own reforms It should continue to undertake extensive reforms in the areas of security, governance, decentralization, and democratization, with a firm commitment. Enhancing effective capacity building in the security sector, among other areas, should lead the process, while respecting the sovereignty of neighboring countries. Enhancing regional cooperation by deepening economic integration is vital. Maximizing this integration will be a key part of achieving broader and longer-term development goals and ultimately political stability. We are of the view that the framework's success depends on an oversight mechanism with well-defined benchmarks that are verifiable and action-oriented. These benchmarks should also include a process to address those that fall short of their stated goals. Mr. President, we fully support the holistic approach for peace and development to address the challenges of the Great Lakes region. In this regard, it was highly commendable that Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and the Special Envoy of the Secretary General to the Great Lakes region, Mary Robinson, visited the region together with World Bank President Jim Yong Kim. This unprecedented joint visit by the leaders of the UN and the World Bank clearly shows the value of an integrated effort that addresses both security and development issues of the region. In order for this partnership to bear fruit, close cooperation and coordination between the two bodies should be further refined and strengthened. We hope that this partnership can continue and expand to our other areas as well. Mr. President, one of the important policy goals of my government is a concurrent realization of peace, security, and economic and social development, not only at the national, but also at the regional and global levels. As a part of this policy effort, my government will continue to actively engage in international development cooperation. As the countries of the Great Lakes region pursue security and development, the past development experience of the Republic of Korea could be helpful. The Republic of Korea is the only country that has transformed itself from an LDC country to donor country within just 6 decades. The Semaul Undong or New Village movement can provide a useful model for rural development and poverty eradication in the region. In closing, we believe it is essential to maintain high-level engagement and commitment from the international community. We are confident that the framework, with firm support from the international community, will surely contribute to the political stability and economic development of the DRC and the Great Lakes region. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank the United States for convening this debate and for the personal commitment that Secretary Kerry has shown by chairing it. It is vitally important that the Security Council maintains its focus on the region at this critical time. So I'd also like to thank the Secretary General, his Special Envoy, Mary Robinson, World Bank President Kim, Commissioner Lamamra, and the Foreign Ministers Shibanda and Kuteza for their briefings this morning. Mr. President, the Democratic Republic of Congo has been a crucible of conflict for more than 2 decades. Brutal cycles of violence threaten both national and regional peace and stability. We have seen yet more horrors in the latest cycle of violence, as the M23 militia commit rapes, carry out summary executions, and recruit child soldiers. The FDLR, while its threat is much reduced, has also continued to carry out abuses, exploiting the instability created by the M23 rebellion. Despite this latest outbreak of violence, we have an opportunity now to begin a new chapter in the troubled region that ends the people's suffering and brings peace to eastern DRC. In February, countries of the region came together and committed to building peace under the Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework. Special Envoy Mary Robinson is supporting their efforts. And Resolution 2098 authorizes MONUSCO to neutralize and disarm all those armed groups that pose the greatest threat to civilians, not least the M23 and the FDLR. Together, these different elements represent a unique opportunity to address the root causes of the conflict in the DRC and to end the cycle of violence once and for all. Mr. President, we must seize this opportunity with determination and vigour. First and foremost, countries in the region must implement their commitments under the framework agreement. The DRC has made a positive start with the development of a national oversight mechanism. Major challenges remain on security sector reform and extending government to the east of the country, and both these steps are necessary to bring peace and prosperity to the Congolese people. But the wider region must also deliver on its commitments. That means, above all, that all countries show respect for their neighbours' territorial integrity and stop any and all assistance to armed groups. It is a matter of great concern to my government that the latest group of experts report refers to continuing external support for rebel groups in the eastern DRC. The meeting of the signatories at the UN General Assembly in September must produce clear benchmarks to measure progress on all the commitments made in the framework agreement. MONUSCO should play its role in support of national and regional efforts. This Council has given the mission a more robust mandate that will put greater pressure on armed groups. MONUSCO will soon carry out offensive operations informed by the latest military technology, including unmanned aerial systems. This pressure must be accompanied with a demobilization plan that offers combatants an alternative to fighting. MONUSCO is adapting to developments on the ground and demonstrating a flexibility and responsiveness that other UN peacekeeping missions would do well to emulate. The United Kingdom stands ready to support all these efforts. We are already providing training to some of the UN peacekeeping troops that will soon deploy in the DRC. Under our Preventing Sexual Violence initiative, we are assisting with the collection and preservation of forensic evidence to help bring to justice perpetrators of sexual violence crimes. And we are providing support to peace initiatives in Eastern DRC, which are fully integrated with the framework agreement. All donor support should be aligned with the regional and national benchmarks of the framework to establish a basis for mutual accountability. Mr. President, we must stay strong in our pursuit of peace. Gains made are fragile and need unyielding support from within DRC, from the immediate neighbours in the region, and from the international community. We must not squander progress with blame or retribution. Accusations by countries in the region not backed up by evidence only undermine our efforts. When this Council adopted Resolution 2098, the representative from the Democratic Republic of Congo said that his country was daring to hope. I can assure him that we are all hoping with him. This Council, the international community, and above all the countries of the region, must dare to do all that they can for the people of the Great Lakes and work together to keep our hopes of peace alive. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to thank the U.S. delegation for the initiative of conducting this Security Council debate on such a relevant item. We welcome the participation in today's meeting of a number of high officials. From the very beginning, we've actively supported the good offices of the SG for swift stabilization of the situation in the region of the Great Lakes, which paved the way for the signing on 24 February in Addis Ababa of the Framework Agreement. This initiative made the matter of the region as one of the top priorities of the Security Council and the international community on the whole. We welcome the vigorous efforts of the Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the UN on the region of the Great Lakes, Madam Mary Robinson, for the implementation of her mandate. We continue the outcomes of the joint visit to the region on 22-24 May of the SG of the UN and the President of the World Bank as an important milestone in encouraging the participants to the framework, or the signatories of the framework, to strictly comply with its spirit and letter and carry out their obligations. We welcome the establishment and beginning of work of the regional oversight mechanism with the participation of all signatories of the framework agreement so as to draft oversight indicators for its practical implementation. We also note the decision of the President of the DRC, Joseph Kabila, to establish a national oversight mechanism. We share the conclusion of the report of the Secretary General that the political agreements must be necessarily bolstered by deepening of economic ties between neighboring states. In this context, we welcome the intention of the World Bank to provide $1 billion with a view to the development of the Great Lakes region and establishing cross-border economic ties as well as the well-being of the people. So as to implement these plans, there is a need for a swift and full halt of violence in the region. We decisively condemn the illicit activities of armed groups having resumed hostilities in eastern DRC. The result of the recent escalation of violence was yet more civilian victims, new flows of refugees and IDPs, violations of international humanitarian law and human rights. Such violations are absolutely inadmissible. It is important to conduct careful investigation and bring perpetrators before justice. Any supports to illegal armed groups must be halted. We expect the deployment of a fully operational intervention brigade under Resolution 2098 within MONUSCO. This should assist in achieving a qualitative breakthrough in combating anti-government armed groups and finally establish trust with respect to neighbors so as to make progress in peace. At this difficult stage of regional development, assistance from the UN aimed at achieving sustainable and lasting peace in the DRC and in the region of the Great Lakes in the whole is more relevant than ever. At the same time, let us not forget that primary responsibility for progress in the peace process is borne by the countries of the region. Important assistance here should also be provided by the African Union and sub-regional organizations. We must not lose sight of the crucial need for comprehensive reform of the security sector in Congo, bolstering the national army, which in the final analysis must take on responsibility for the protection of civilians as well as ensuring the territorial integrity of the country. Work must be done so as to eradicate the root causes of the reoccurring conflict, including by instating order in the exploitation of mineral resources. Primary responsibility in these matters also is borne by the Congolese people. For its part, Russia, with other members of the international community, shall continue to provide support to the people and government of the DRC and the states of the region of the Great Lakes so as to resolve the challenges before them. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Morocco.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I'd like to begin by thanking the American presidency for taking the initiative of organizing this debate on the situation in the DRC and in the Great Lakes region. The peoples of the region, and with them the peoples of our continent, attach the greatest importance to this high-level meeting in order to consolidate the peace dynamic which came out of the agreement of 24 February last. I'd also like to thank the Secretary General for his briefing and applaud his personal commitment, as well as that of his Special Envoy, Mary Robinson, who indisputably have contributed to the progress achieved in the last 6 months. And finally, on behalf of Morocco, I'd like to commend Madam Robinson for her unwavering commitment and for her efforts to assist full implementation of the 24th of February agreement. Mr. President, for decades, the Democratic Republic of Congo has suffered from a succession of crises which have harmed its national cohesion and threatened its sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity. Behind criminal acts committed in the DRC by armed groups, militia, and others working in the East are human tragedies of a humanitarian crisis impacting the lives of millions. This hidden drama in the DRC involves the victims of the conflict, ruined childhoods, and lives destroyed by various types of violence, especially sexual violence against women and children, as well as violations of human rights. The impact of the Congolese crisis carries with it a regional dimension as well. The entire Great Lakes region has been affected, as well as Central Africa, by this crisis in the humanitarian, security, and economic arenas. It is time to put an end to it and make it irreversible. The signing on the 24th of February of the Framework Agreement on Peace, Security, and Cooperation for the DRC and the Great Lakes region was the fruit of regional concerted efforts supported by the United Nations and sub-regional organizations in order to bring forth real hope of peace. And this agreement, which is innovative in its approach, is important in that it provides a process for true hope to remedy and put a lasting end to the instability of the region, which has lasted all too long. This opening also goes hand in hand with measures taken by the Security Council to progressively adapt MONUSCO's mandate to the realities on the ground. Regionally, the International Conference on the Great Lakes region also put in place important mechanisms to contribute to the stabilization efforts and those of verification. And finally, the visits of the Secretary General, accompanied by the President of the World Bank and the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, have made it possible to graft different new dynamics on the ground with an economic dimension in order to relaunch economic exchanges, reduce vulnerability, promote economic regional integration, especially through reactivation of the economic community of the Great Lakes region in favor of peace. Mr. President, all of these efforts to resolve the Congolese crisis are but laudable, and we should be pleased with them. And yet this important momentum for peace and hope should be sustained through respecting the commitments undertaken by the signatories of the agreement and by confidence building amongst the region's countries in order to achieve lasting peace and shared prosperity. Mr. President, never have so many efforts been undertaken to resolve the Congolese crisis, and we should applaud that. And yet it's important to realize that the fruits of peace cannot be achieved without confidence-building measures and working together to build lasting peace and shared common prosperity. And in that context, we applaud the efforts undertaken by the DRC to fulfill its obligations and to fully play its role in the peace process. The Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo this morning just renewed that commitment solemnly. Having said that, the path ahead is still very long, and bilateral partners, as well as the United Nations system, are all called upon to fully support the Democratic Republic of Congo in order to restore its authority throughout its national territory and to be successful with its institutional reforms, national reconciliation, and human development. The countries of the region, for their part, have the obligation of quickly and fully and with good faith implementing their respective commitments undertaken in the Framework Agreement, especially those that relate to the strict respect of sovereignty and territorial integrity of the DRC. We would encourage the Special Envoy, Madam Robinson, working in coordination with and with the support of the Special Representative, the Secretary General for the DRC, to continue to accompany, coordinate, and evaluate the implementation of these commitments. Sir, the DRC has a privileged place at the very heart of our African continent. It has enormous economic and human potential, and its stability and prosperity have direct consequences for all of their neighbors. The current process is capable of providing long sought after stability for the DRC and the Great Lakes regions, and thus free up energies for this vast region and country. The Kingdom of Morocco has always been at the side of the Congolese people in difficult moments of its history and has been involved in all peacekeeping operations led by the United Nations and will continue to maintain its commitment in favor of national unity, territorial integrity of this country, and stability throughout the region of the Great Lakes. Thank you very much, sir.
I thank the representative of Morocco for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Argentina.
Gracias. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to most especially ask you to convey to Mr. Secretary of State John Kerry our appreciation for adding relevance to this debate with his very presence. And I'd like to thank the delegation of the United States for putting this issue at the center of the actions and reflections of this Security Council, and for which it is responsible. It is also encouraging to have amongst us the presence of high-level authorities and ministers from the region and from the entire international community. We appreciate the participation of the Secretary General, the President of the World Bank, and the participation of the Special Envoy for the Great Lakes region, Mary Robinson. Mr. President, Argentina trusts that the first steps taken to implement the framework agreement for peace, security, and cooperation in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Great Lakes region, which was signed in February, will provide an opportunity for attacking in an integrated manner the deep-seated causes of the conflict in the region and lay a foundation for economic, political, and social development which will be sustainable and lead to lasting and sustainable peace. Shared responsibility on which the framework agreement is based will decisively contribute to the efforts of the countries of the region, but it is also a political and ethic call to the international community to be present, to provide cooperation and follow-up to the agreement. We renew our support to MONUSCO in its task of protecting civilians while fully respecting human rights, international humanitarian law. Argentina understands that the intervention brigade, as stated by the Secretary General, is an additional component of a broad solution to the conflict in the region. But it also understands that it is the primary responsibility of the governments and armed forces to provide protection for civilians and territorial integrity of states. Mr. President, Argentina believes that it's an imperative priority for governments and peoples of the DRC and countries in the region to assume and never allow more ongoing violations of human rights, international humanitarian law actions to take place with impunity as they have in the region. And these actions should especially not be tolerated by armed groups or rebellions. Special attention should be paid to complaints of these actions, which are sometimes committed by government armed forces. We would encourage the government of the DRC to go more deeply into the democratic transformations and institution transformations, which are absolutely vital for security, defense, and justice in that country. We call upon all signatory states to fully comply with the commitments undertaken and to not tolerate or support any armed group or provide protection for any groups or individuals responsible for crimes against humanity, violations of human rights, or other international law. Respecting international law and human rights is a necessary condition for lasting peace. Sir, we believe that the situation of refugees and internally displaced persons requires immediate attention, but the right to a dignified life for all men and women will come from initiatives such as that led by the governments themselves in the region and by the United Nations and the World Banks and other donors and partners, all of whom will contribute to putting into place infrastructure, human social development institutions, economic and social development institutions, and as Mrs. Robinson said, they will include a human rights perspective, gender perspective, integration of the young people, and protection of children. Also, management and legal exploitation, legitimate and fair and responsible and transparent exploitation of natural resources is key for peace and for sustained development. Mr. President, just a few days ago, we received a report from the prestigious organization Human Rights Watch. This report includes testimony of a 12-year-old girl who had gone to buy some sugar with her friends, and I open quotes. I saw a soldier from N23. I started running. The soldier caught me and told me he was going to kill me because I was trying to run away from him. I stayed quiet. I was very scared. And then he raped me. I screamed, but he closed my mouth. He put his hand over my mouth. Mr. President, Argentina, the international community, is convinced that we can only overcome poverty, fear, insecurity, and violence when people understand that the history of the human beings in the DRC of the region gets to a place where we no longer hear testimonies as such that I just read by that 12-year-old groom. And I hope that the meeting that you have convened will lead us in that direction. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Argentina for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the United States initiative in convening this debate, and to Secretary Kerry for his presence. I also thank the Secretary General and Special Envoy Mrs. Mary Robinson for their sustained engagement and leadership, and of course all the briefers for their insightful remarks. As the attendance of all these people indicates today, we are at a pivotal moment in the search for durable peace and security in Eastern DRC and the Great Lakes. We should be shamed by the staggering toll of the conflict, lives of more than 5, maybe 6 million people, displacement of millions more, and the subjection of countless men, women and children to horrendous human rights abuses. Today, the DRC is languishing at the bottom of the UN Human Development Index. The Peace, Security and Cooperation Framework provides the best opportunity to definitively break the cycle of violence and instability. We are at a moment of hope because of the leadership and efforts of regional governments and organizations working in close cooperation with the United Nations and the Secretary General himself, and now with the World Bank. The potential genius of the framework is that for the first time, all relevant parties have made clear commitments to integrate political, security and development efforts, a nexus that is essential to tackling the root causes of instability. The recent joint visit by the World Bank President and Secretary General reflects what should be a crucial impetus for the region. There have been encouraging early signs of follow-up on the PSC commitments, but also, of course, stark reminders of the sobering challenges ahead. Attacks by the M23 and fighting with the FARDC near Goma are ongoing, and just last week, attacks by the Allied Democratic Forces in Kamango forced more than 65,000 refugees to flee into Uganda. We note Ugandan Foreign Minister Kutetsa's warnings this morning about the ADF. Mr. President, the immediate priority must be to ensure that all signatories take practical steps to implement their commitments under the framework. And where they fail to live up to these commitments, they must be held to account by their own citizens and civil society, by their regional neighbours, and by the broader international community, including this Council. Australia welcomes initial efforts by the DRC government to initiate key reforms. The establishment of the DRC's National Oversight Mechanism is an important step, as was the inaugural meeting of the Regional 11+4 Oversight Mechanism and the establishment of the Technical Support Committee. The implementation of tailored, realistic benchmarks will, however, be fundamental to the success of the PSC, It's imperative that broad agreement is reached on the specific benchmarks and how these will be taken forward by the next meeting of the Regional Oversight Mechanism in New York in September. All signatories, of course, have committed under the framework not to interfere in the affairs of neighbouring countries and to neither tolerate nor provide assistance or support of any kind to armed groups. Any collaboration between the FARDC and the FDLR must cease, as must any support to the M23. There can be no peace as long as such support continues. Turning briefly to some key practical challenges and priorities ahead, persistent reports of grave human rights abuses and widespread sexual violence by armed groups and the FARDC obviously undermine the foundations for any lasting peace. At an event Australia co-hosted this week, we heard firsthand the impact of the use of rape as a tool of war to destroy communities in the DRC. Impunity cannot be tolerated. It is critical that serious action is taken to prevent such atrocities and to investigate and prosecute such crimes. The efforts of the ICC deserve our full support. It is also critical that security sector reforms are intensified. Ultimate responsibility for security, of course, rests with the DRC government. A professional and effective army is central to this. The FARDC's capabilities, discipline, and cooperation with the UN mission, including the Intervention Brigade, will be critical to the success of efforts in the Kivus. Disarmament, demobilisation and reintegration must, finally, also be given genuine priority. The unregulated flow of small arms and failure to implement effective reintegration strategies are themselves root causes, root drivers of conflict. Women's participation and leadership in both the SSR and DDR processes is essential to long-term peace. So too is their direct engagement in the implementation of the framework. Special Envoy Robinson's work to ensure their full and effective participation, including through the recent Bujumbura conference, is long overdue, prospective and reassuring. In concluding, Mr. President, Australia reaffirms our strong support for MONUSCO and the deployment of the Intervention Brigade and expresses our deep appreciation to the troop contributing countries. The Intervention Brigade cannot, of course, be seen as a panacea or a substitute for the DRC's own responsibilities. What the brigade can do and what this Council intended it to do is to act as a circuit breaker, to create the space for the DRC government to implement the necessary reforms and tackle the underlying issues of the conflict. The brigade's creation was an historic and risky decision by the Council, born out of frustration certainly, but more so from necessity. The DRC and its neighbours have provided the essential enabling environment for a new start, but implementation will obviously be decisive. The Council itself must continue to give incisive and consistent attention to the DRC to reinforce the incentives for change, to break the cyclical patterns of the past. We all know that this is a genuinely critical moment. We must ensure it becomes transformative. I understand there is a Congolese saying, and I quote, that no matter how hard you throw a dead fish in the water, it still won't swim. This framework of hope is very much alive, and we need to ensure it is able to swim.
I thank the representative of Australia for his statement. There are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of the members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.